Bonjour à tous, merci d'être présents cet après-midi sur l'après-midi stratégie industrielle qu'on a organisée. On va commencer par un échange, une table ronde sur... Donc là, je parle en français, mais après, on passera en anglais pour cette table ronde. Autour de Gaia X. Donc Gaia X, c'est une association qui a été créée et lancée en 2020 et qui existe depuis 2021 maintenant, qui a pour objectif de développer des normes, des standards, des spécifications techniques qui vont permettre de développer des conditions de confiance et de sécurité dans le but ultime est de permettre de faire circuler de la donnée pour créer des espaces de données dans des thématiques particulières, différentes, pour développer des nouveaux produits et services. Donc, l'open source est au cœur de Gaia X, c'est pour ça qu'on est là aussi aujourd'hui à cet événement. Il est essentiel dans l'accessibilité à ces composants qui vont permettre tous ces développements, dans aussi l'autonomie stratégique qui fait partie du cœur de Gaia X. Donc, pour en parler aujourd'hui, j'ai la chance d'accueillir donc, Benjamin Laplane, VP Technologie de 3DS à Outscale, Christina Pauna, qui s'occupe de la communauté open source au sein de Gaia X, et Mathias Debièvre, qui est le président de l'espace de données Skills et Éducation, Prometheus, et aussi le cofondateur et CEO de Vision. Donc, je vais passer avec vous, je vais modérer cette discussion, et on va passer en anglais. So, thank you all for being here. Est-ce que ça marche? Yeah? So thank you all for being here, but maybe we could start first, because I made a very quick introduction of yourselves, but maybe you can present yourself a little bit more and present where do you stand within Gaia X. So Christina, it's obvious, but for the others. So I will let maybe first Benjamin.
Maybe we can go Yes, so hi everybody, nice to be here. So yeah, you described it pretty well, maybe a quick words. So I'm the president of Prometheus X. Prometheus X is a member of Gaia X, and we are working on the education and skills data space. So we have different data spaces, so it's a sectoral project for education and skills. I will talk a bit more later about the use cases. But what we are doing in Prometheus X is developing open source building blocks to facilitate personal data sharing between public and private organizations and interoperability of skills and education data. And my company, Visions, is in a sense an operator of these building blocks, such as others, and happy to discuss all of this with you today.
Okay. I'm Christina Pauna. I'm the open source program manager in Gaia X. I joined the association earlier this year, and I try to help all the members and non-members that engage with open source software. So we have a couple of different initiatives and different software components that are built towards Gaia X. And I try to help them and make sure that things are aligned and everything is consistent and predictable as much as possible. Thank you for having me.
So Benjamin, I'm a VP Technology at Outscale. 3DS Outscale is a subsidiary of Dassault Systèmes, the European software company, and we are a cloud infrastructure and platform service provider. We've been one of the founding members of Gaia X, and we are now co-leading the identity and access management working group. And I think some of the work that we've been doing for the past months is going to be seen at the demo for the Gaia X Summit next week. So if you're interested of seeing a bit more at work, I think next week would be a good place to be.
Not so convenient. Anyway, so maybe we could start with the first question, because so we have seen like Matthias as a user and also a provider for its community in education and skills. we have seen how cloud service providers, because you are kind of a cloud service provider at Outscale, you are involved in open source in order to engage the community up to on the cloud service providers, and how the community is also organized and managed in a way through Gaia X. So just to remind on Gaia X, what is open source and what is really key within the association, and probably Christina, you could first also explain what's the topic of the open source and how things are done.
Yes, so in Gaia X we have a part that deals with specifications, where that work is organized into working groups, where which Benjamin mentioned earlier, and that is the first part where the functionality of data spaces is described in the architecture document, in the trust framework document, in the policy document. So you have different pieces, but that part is the specification part. And the second part with open source code is the implementation of those specifications. And because one of, actually two of the values of Gaia X are openness and transparency, everything that is done in the context of Gaia X when it comes to software, but actually also when it comes to documents, it's open. So all the code developed within Gaia X is open source. We have one group that we call the open source community. We have regular meetings where we discuss the newest and latest. We have events, hackathons that are, this year were 3, I think last year there were 2, where we foster collaboration and we try to get people to engage with each other, especially those who work on similar topics. And that's a bit how we're organized. Of course, a mailing list and multiple ways where you can reach us. We're within the open source community group, we are organized pretty much the same as the other working groups in Gaia X, meaning similar ways to contact us. But one thing that is specific to our group is that it's public for both members and no members. So pretty much anybody can engage as much as you would like to, and you're more than welcome. So Thursday from 9, a bit of publicity now. Thursdays from 9 a.m. Central Europe time. And the ways to engage and connect is on our GitLab. You can ask me how to reach if you cannot find it yourself. But it's pretty easy to find it. And of course, myself and the other volunteers in the group monitor the mailing list in case you have questions, like technical questions that you need help with. And we try to make everything as open as possible. Usually we encourage people who want to raise issues to do that in GitLab rather than directly connecting to us. Not that we don't want to discuss with people, but we want to share the information, and usually people have the same questions on similar topics. So if you do it in a transparent way in an issue in GitLab, then it's easier for other people to just see what has been already discussed rather than creating bottlenecks.
So thank you, Christina. So as you can see, within Gaia X you have open source codes, and you have also an open way of working but you have to be member to work on the working groups within Gaia X, except for the working group on open source led by Christina, or kind of led by Christina, heavily supported by Christina. What is done in the open source through Gaia X is really what we call in Gaia X the federated services of Gaia X, which are identification, ID, what Benjamin just said, identity access management, which is also self-description, which is also how you can assign a label or level of label to a service of a cloud service provider, and how you can also test and evaluate the conformity of those services. So, Benjamin, we are working together within the French endeavor to accelerate the development of this open source. Maybe you could explain a little bit more why 3ds Outscale is also involved in this working group and in this specific topic, and what is a little bit more within the overall strategy of your open source strategy.
Part of Dassault System is not very well known as being an open source a company. It's more kind of the old way of doing software. But from Outscale, being at an external company for a while, at least for 7 years, we had the chance to understand the value of open source, so both as users and contributors. So we always had a very strong strategy towards open source and with multiple approach. Usually the way to go open source as an entry level is you find something nice that actually fits one of the technical use case that you want to use something, and you start using it, and by using it you also grow some kind of expertise, and then you develop new corner cases for it, so you decided that you want to enrich such features or such technical components, and then you go back to the other side of the barrier, which is, okay, you are starting contributing to a specific project and you start making it better, which is actually one of the founding principles of open source, of a free and open source software. The other part is some of the breaks that we are actually developing within Outscale, we decided to open source it because we felt that it has a greater purpose and we could leverage other use cases than ours, and we want to make it bigger. And I think that doing something for yourself with a very strong sense of purpose, it's very important to actually kickstart a technical components or a software, a solution. But if you want to go to the next stage as in terms of usefulness, in terms of reach, you need to be able to offer it to other people without anything in return, just to see if it sticks, to see if people are interested into it. The other part of open source is, and that was, and you have to follow me on this one, but that's one of the reasons why when we started our infrastructure as a service, we were actually EC2 compliant, which is the AWS API grammar, because it was one way to be able to leverage all of the open source tooling that was developed upon it. So when I said that open source was is a very different layer and very different aspect of the way we've been building things at Outscale, if we've been users, we've been contributors, we've been open sourcing our own project, and we wanted to leverage as much as possible of the open source community overall. 2 to 3 years ago, we decided that our identity and access management component, we needed to some rework. So at the beginning, it was an internal component, and we were actually trying to look at what was existing on the market, any existing solution. Of course there are, no surprise there. And it was kind of at the same time where we started discussing Gaia X, and we wanted to, being kind of a new player into the YAS playground, we felt that we need to bring something more around the table. And when Gaia X arrived and all the discussion about interoperability, about transparency, about compliance, which is also one of the very core aspects of Outscale, we felt that we needed to leverage the fact that, yes, we needed to redo our identity and access management layer, and we wanted to build something a bit more future-proof, a bit more decentralized, and a bit more trustworthy overall. And that's one of the reasons why we actually integrated the Gaia X program, is we felt that the identity layer needed to be a bit more global and a bit less siloed if we wanted to bring security and compliance to all of the service providers, such as ourselves, but also to all of our customers. And the approach of leveraging existing open source components and contributing it to nourish and to support the Gaia X objectives was one of the very important aspects for us, because we wanted to be sure that what we've been building will continue to have purpose outside of Outscale. And that's why one of the reasons why we are working with other French service provider, but also with the Germans on the other way, because it's a kind of the two side of organization mostly. And I know there is a lot of country joining Gaia X by the day, but mostly German and French collaboration, trying to push a single approach of identity and access management into the same direction. So it can go from infrastructure to platforms to software to the data spaces, as Matthias will talk further along. So yeah, I think that's and we are, and on the other hand, contributing to existing open source project is something, and opening your own code. But when you want to make everyone collaborate at the same level, that's when some kind of control or community management is actually very useful, because it put everyone at the same level for the governance of the project and the code that is being produced.
Thank you, Benjamin. So we can see that you have, it's important to be part of a federation of cloud service providers. This is what we are going to do within the Gaia X framework. This is a way by the open source to be compliant and interoperable with others, and to the specifications also of Gaia X. And this is also a way, and why do we want that? Because we could not need this, but it's of course to avoid vendor locking as an example. And it's also for the user part, for the data spaces, so very important to be built on the top of open source generated this way, so you can be autonomous. And maybe Matthias, you can tell us more about how you can build this and how and why, because I think that you are also providing open source on your side for your sector, so maybe you could explain us on the both sides.
Yes, thank you. So I'd like to maybe illustrate what a data space is for with some concrete examples. So we work on the data space for education and skills. And so if we take the situation that we've all been through and maybe will be in again, is a person looking what to do with their life, what kind of job should I do, okay? From that, who is involved in that? You have the person, you have a bunch of organizations, employment agencies, career coaches, and so on that help the person. You have a bunch of tools, job boards, skills portfolios that also help the person. And you have training organizations that are looking to train the person, and employers that are looking to employ the person. All of these players need to collaborate to make it happen. And in the end, it is all about sharing data about the person with these players, and sharing data about the job offers, the training offers with the person, and matching them together. If we take the situation, it's not only in France, it's worldwide. Your skills profile or your education profile is today scattered across many organizations. Your school, your university, all the tools you've used, your employers, the training organizations, and so on. They're all little bits and pieces of your profile across these organizations. What data space is, in a sense, is to be able to connect all of these organizations to a same data network, so that the person can say, I have some data here, here, and there. I want to take it back and reshare it to be matched with a training offer, with a job offer, or discover what job is best for me. And this brings big business cases for a lot of players, because training organizations are looking to sell their trainings, and so are looking for that kind of precise profiles to target people with their trainings. Same for employers and their job offers. Same for job boards or this kind of AI tools and skills applications that are looking to get data about the users to build the best profile. And so this is what the skills data space, in a sense, enables, is the interconnection of all these public and private actors to a same data network. Now, on the open source part, my company provides such a kind of network operator, and so we have about 40 organizations connected to it today. So why would we need a data space? Why can't we just be the sole provider of the system? Well, for several reasons. First of all, it would be unrealistic to consider that everybody is going to connect to us, and we would be kind of the gatekeeper to say if you want to connect to the network, you need to go through us, because you have big organizations like ministries, public organizations, big companies that don't want to rely on our API, don't want to be locked in, and will want to have kind of their own way of connecting to the network. And also because by having these open source components and this kind of open, decentralized way of connecting to the network, there are many more organizations that will in the end connect. And so through the interoperability of the data space and through this kind of diffusion of open source building blocks, you augment the number of nodes on the network, the number of organizations connected, and in the end that's the true business value of the network, is the number of organizations connected to it. And so Prometheus was created. It's the same that what Benjamin was saying, is we said, okay, with a bunch of other competitors and other organizations that are working to the same goals, let's open source what we've been working on so that we create this open layer and we mutualize developments on how to interconnect all these organizations to the skills data space. And this will bring, in a sense, much more organizations to the data space, much more data to flow, and so much more business for everybody. And so we do it in the context of Gaia X, to take the specifications, to translate them into code, and to provide the community with these building blocks to connect to the skill education and skills data space, and allow all these business cases to happen.
So yeah, thank you. So because I might say that this is an initiative in France, but we can imagine that we have maybe many initiatives in France, also private or public. You could have also other initiatives in other countries. So here we can see how important it is to be built on the same kind of layers, compatible layers, interoperable layers, and also to be interoperable in between different kinds of education and skills data spaces, because here we are talking about Prometheus X. But we could have, and I know that there are some initiatives in Germany, and I guess in all other countries. Plus, if I am a user of a data space, I might have a master degree from Germany, from Italy, from I don't know where, because students are also moving in different countries. So we can see here the importance of this kind of open source layer. And do you have already some exchange with other countries on data spaces?
Yes, so we are part and we contributed. So there is a European project on the skills data space, and there is a consortium that won and that we are part of. And then there are different, like there is the Merlot project in Germany. And those are about the kind of two true pure, in a sense, data space project, skills data space projects in Europe. And so we are now looking on common use cases, on cross-border data exchanges, and as well to see how we can mutualize efforts on the development of those building blocks. Because, for instance, Merlot is focusing on some building blocks that we are not, and vice versa. So looking to mutualize the development efforts. And then we have members in Finland, in Spain, in the Netherlands. So Prometheus is truly a European project that kind of federates all of these organizations that want to make the skills data space happen, and that mutualized open source development efforts.
Okay, thank you. Christina, so, and the others, you can start thinking about my question. And why open source is bringing new markets? It's the question of today. So why on Gaia X side, open source will bring some new market?
Okay. So to me, because we're talking in the Gaia X context which is based on data and data economy, to me data is a byproduct of any activity. So you can imagine any kind of activity, me liking video with cats, It's it's true. It's a byproduct. That information is a byproduct of my activity, and it is recognized already that there's a lot of data out there that has been collected for a while, which is not monetized, and the point with Gaia X is to unleash that power and to make use of the data. But of course, you need to do that in a way that is not going to harm and not going to come back in a bad way. And the point with open source is, if we look at the landscape in Europe, which also it's well known and recognized, is mostly SMEs. And if you think of an SME within a domain, which may collect data from their domain, if they are to access data economy, it needs to be a low threshold. You cannot expect some, let's say, SME in agriculture, random example, to care much or invest much or do much to monetize the data. But there is a lot of value in that. And to expand on that example and to answer your question on how you access new markets, if I take an SME in agriculture domain, you think of the data they collect for their own use. You know, these days, and we have the IoT system here, where you do a lot of sensors and visualizing cameras, recording the fields to see how to improve the health of the plants, for example, that you may grow. And you already captured that data for the company's own processes, but then think about how that can be put into data economy. And you have one use case in the agriculture domain where it may help other companies to make use of that. But then you can also share that with research, which has a bit of a different focus. Or I can also imagine wildlife conservation. If you monitor your fields and you have cameras nonstop, you may spot, endangered species. Again, random wild example, but the possibilities are endless to even pass by the domain, like outside of the data space, not just connected in the domain, but also outside of it. And connecting that to open source and why open source, it's recognized that open source helps improve, helps growth, accelerates, that's the word. Not a native English speaker. So accelerates growth, and it's one solution where you can lower that thresholds for companies that are in individual industries to access the other markets, especially in the data economy. So that is at least my view on it. Yeah, go ahead.
If you allow me. So just to come back to what you've been saying, and then I'm going to go back to the market, the market approach. The first thing which is very interesting in the Gaia X specific is, so you told about transparency, you told about openness, and I think I don't want to forget that we're doing implementation, because by doing transparency, it just allows everyone to see what we've been doing. Openness is something that everyone can contribute to. But if we stop there, we are basically doing the RFC or W3C job, which I think is not enough at some point when you want to drive usage and you want to accelerate the support and the adoption of a specific approach, and said interoperability and such. So I think that the very important part at the end is, that's why we're talking about open source when we're talking about Gaia X, is yes, the documentation is open, which is something that's usually a good thing, but the implementation as well. So the implementation is a collaboration through the open source community. What we've been producing is actually an implementation, a reference implementation for everyone to actually use it. So the leverage for us is not that we're going to be the only users of what we produce, is that others actually take it and leverage it to connect themselves to the overall network. And as Matthias said, the value of a network is just the number of actors actually contributing to it. So the overall value is just by how many people contribute by bringing their own data, their own services at the table. So I think that's when you start actually getting there, is okay, so if everyone is actually supported and or accelerated by tools and implementation to contribute to a network, then by design you're gonna increase the value of the network, and the value of the network is actually a new market reach. So now I'm gonna take the hat as a service provider. The approach of implementing specifically the Gaia X approach by interoperability, I think it's one of the key leverage for the European ecosystem specifically, to leverage their specifics. They are usually smaller than average huge US or Chinese players that are usually very integrated. Like all of the services are available from one-stop shop. Everything is great, but you're going to be leveraging a single company. Where when you turn to Europe, all the technology are there, but they are very hard to actually integrate. You need to do all the job by yourself. So when you go to the US cloud service provider, you're going to have like 250 to 300 different services, and you go to European market, even if I'm talking about outscale, you're going to get maybe like 20, 25, 50 services at some point. But everything else actually exists on the market, but is very hard to reach. So for us, it's a leverage to push the accessibility of other services that actually exist and help them connect, so we can bring an overall solution to the customers, because the customer doesn't want to go through the hassle of integrating itself, trying to go to one, okay, I'm going to connect to him, and then going to the other, and it's kind of a ball game where everyone doesn't want to hold the bag at the end. So I think that when we're talking about a specific Gaia X, I think one of the key objective, and I think that's why Gaia X was actually started as an industry initiative and not a public initiative, because everyone around the table understood that by doing it among users and providers, we were going to build value for ourselves and then for the others as a second effect. So that's just the Gaia X answer. But I think overall, leveraging existing open source components and technical solution, and I'm going to have a few key examples. So at Healthcare, we've been using and contributing to Ceph, to KVM and KMU as a very low-level stacks. And we also have been contributing to the Kubernetes and the HashiCorp ecosystem as well, because we want Healthcare to be recognized, being accessible through these vectors of usage. And we know that it's kind of a state-of-the-art tools to use a cloud service provider. So as a cloud service provider, if I want my users, I want my customers to be able to use and to be able to integrate me into their workload, into their process, I need to be included in their actual toolbox. As a service provider, I can't ask for my customers to start fresh as a toolbox. So every process go to the trash, every tools go to the trash, and here is my version of it. It doesn't work that way. If you've been in the industry for at least 2 years, I think you get that. So now if I bring everything at the end, I think that as a service provider, and I think that's what Christina started to say, is like every company can be a service provider at the end, even if it's not its first design. And you said, okay, maybe I'm an agriculture company or I'm a forest exploitation company. I have data, I have something of value, and I want to be able to trade it, to exchange, and to value. And you can do this. So that means that at the end, when you are looking at the networks, there's not only consumer and producer, but everyone is bringing something and everyone is getting something. And I think that's one of the core strengths when you are looking at open sourcing, is kind of the reciprocity. Is the reciprocity that actually generates, is you get something and you give something, and sometimes it's the other way around. You give something and you get something, and I think by design it brings value to the whole network and to all the participants around the table.
So thank you, Benjamin. So maybe Matthias, because it was really interesting to see that yes, AWS or other big player have like hundreds of services when one European company have several, and then you have to connect everything. So this is why I was talking about the Federation of Cloud Service Providers. But at one time, it's also the case of, and we talked a lot about SMEs and small companies, and I think that for education and skills is typically the kind of companies that are SMEs that needs to be part of the data spaces. to avoid also to have all the data within the same solution that will keep all the market. So probably, Matthias, you could also explain a little bit.
Yes, so different things. I think what Benjamin described on the, in a sense, infrastructure service level, it's exactly the same at the application level. In education, you have in Europe maybe 3,000, 4,000 companies that provide edtech, so educational technology. And it's small companies, in average 10, 20 employees, right? And they each do very specific stuff, like I'm going to help you be good at math. I'm going to identify your soft skills. I'm going to match you with a job. If you integrate them together, they propose a better value for the customer, for a university, for a school, for an employer. Instead of buying one by one things that work separately and then you need to integrate, now thanks to this interconnection, you can buy packages that brings more business to these companies as well. And so on the open source part, it's, for instance, it's the same example that when Christina said, could have a company, for instance, they identify your skills. They're going to do an integration with a university, with the system of a university to get the data about what kind of curriculums the students are to identify the skills. If now by making that connection, it's through a connector that is compatible with the data space, then somebody else can come and say, well, actually, your data on the skills of the students, I can use them to match them with job opportunities or with other training opportunities. And for the first company, it's the same technical effort. They connect to a whole, in a sense, data marketplace, and then everybody can come and propose their use cases on it, and that brings new markets for each of these companies that weren't selling to training organizations to match them with their trainings, but now their data contributes to that value chain and they can get a cut of the deal. And so this is essential to have then these connectors to be open, interoperable, but it's also, I think it's essential to work on the governance of it, because that means that everybody in the ecosystem now shares some same rules about data commercialization, data sharing, and then the university that has provided the data to that company needs to agree or not if it can be sold on the data market and so on. So there are a lot of questions about governance, but I think it can be also, if we look at all the business that data marketplace can provide to these individual companies, and that data spaces are the way of connecting to the marketplace, then it's a great opportunity for cloud providers to propose these services to connect to the data space, because it will bring all those companies to say, I want to connect to the data space, so I'm going to look for the easiest way to implement it, and I'm going to go to the cloud provider that has all these connected services. Today, if we look at edtechs, 75% of them are on AWS. If tomorrow you have this kind of educational data marketplace, they're able to get more revenue by connecting to it, and let's say Outscale is the first one to propose like integrated managed service to connect to education and skills data space, lots of them will move from AWS to Outscale to be able to access that opportunity. So I think it's a great business and great innovation ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, so thank you. So now for the last question, it's about the next steps. So here we have a lot of intention. Some of are already implemented. So just to say that Gaia X, we hear about Gaia X since 2020. Even if the association exists in 2021, since 2021. So this is a very young initiative, and as you said, Benjamin, it's an industrial one with funding coming from the members. I will say the member fees, but not public fundings. So we have the summit next week on Gaia X. I think this is the first time we will have a live demo on the services. We talked also a lot about the community and the need of a network and contributors. So you very quickly explained a little bit at the beginning, Christina, how you can manage the community and bring more people to join the global effort. Maybe we can now, after this very interesting discussion, we can present this a little bit more.
Okay, so in terms of next step with regards to the open source community in Gaia X, first of all, there are a couple of initiatives that you may or may not be familiar with. We have the federated services software components that Anne-Sophie mentioned. Some of them are QA ready, and there's ongoing integration effort between them. And you're going to see some of that next week. I'm not going to go too much into detail. So that is one of the components. And of course, the next steps for that part is to further develop them and further improve them and maintain. And of course, adapt to the specifications that we have and the need of the users for those services. So that is very recently available. The other component is the Gaia X compliance service, which has been around also for like 4 or 5 months now. So to us, it seems like very long time in the rapid and the dynamic environment that we're in. But objectively speaking, is not that long. But that one has a lot of attraction, a lot of companies and individuals try it out. And in the since June, I think it was announced, we are seeing a lot of engagement from the community with it. And by engagement, I mean issues raised. Of course, we have bugs, every software has, and improvements and patches proposed, which is really great to see. So those are the two main components in terms of software that we have, and by components, I mean bigger chunks. The federation services, it's quite big. And the next step for that is to go implement the latest trust framework. So the compliance service is an implementation of the Gaia X trust framework. We have the latest one, 2210, which has just come out. It was agreed upon last month. And the next step is to implement that. Of course, the software implementation is a little bit behind with the document specification. And I encourage you to come join us and help us do that. Who wants to go next?
And you, Matthias. For the education and skills, where are you now? So the Prometheus, it's an association, I think. And yes. What are the next steps?
So Prometheus is an association. We have different members that have, I guess the word in English is made contributions in kind. It means that they have opened some of their code on some of the building blocks we need on sharing education and skills data. So we have some components on skills data interoperability, on consent management, on contract management. We have different use cases that have started using it. For instance, a product to help people find a job, as I was saying before, used by about 20,000 people here in France. And the next steps are, we are now discussing wider funding with the French state to fund more of these building blocks. We have a big community of public and private players that have identified what kind of building blocks they need. And so it's to develop this more, and also there is a big project at European level for the European skills data space, and so now we are federating, as I was mentioning before, other projects in Europe to start building a truly European network based on those components. So yeah, next steps are more implementation and more people using the services built on top of it.
Thank you. And Benjamin, a last word on the 2DS outscale side, maybe on the summit or on the next steps.
Yeah, so we have 2 to 3 people working almost full time on the identity and access working group. I believe that the last weeks have been pretty painful preparing the demo. Yeah, the last weeks and then the last days usually the worst. So I'm sure the demo is gonna work out. The main trajectory for healthcare is how gonna we reconciliate the long-term approach of Gaia X, because we are working on the implementation, so that means very hands-on, but it also means that it's kind of trying to define the way identity and access management should be on the long term. But as we know at healthcare that we have real customers, it's pretty long to move them to the way they've been doing things to the new way they should be doing things. Specifically, when you talk, I'm going to talk about identity. When you move from a centralized system to decentralized systems, it's not only a concept, it's also an implementation that has huge impact on users, on user experience, and on compliance and process and security for the customers. So the major the major goal for healthcare is how we're going to try to kind of deal with both, like the long-term approach of Gaia X and the short-term approach where we have actual customers waiting for us. I mean, we are working with customers and we want to expose to them bits by bits the new way of doing things, but still being able to use a centralized approach as they were used to. So that's next year a big project for us is put into motion the new version of the identity and access management for the healthcare customers, and in the meantime trying to be sure that we are not getting away from the Gaia X implementation and specifications and implementation. So that's quite the challenge for us.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we could jump to the question session. So if you want to ask questions, you can ask also the questions in French, and we can translate them. Okay.
Okay, so the question is about the process of working from documentation and specifications to implementation, and where the openness actually happens in the process. So would that be right? Okay. So Gaia X actually chose. So Gaia X was at the beginning very few actors, and it actually grew for the past 2 years to dozens to hundreds. 300s. So as you can guess, it's quite huge to maintain. We've been working on a weekly basis, so it's very short iterations. On a weekly basis, we are working on the common documents, which is open, which is usually on the GitLabs or collaborative platforms, depending on the working groups, and everyone contributes to the same document along the week, every week. Yes, for specifications, and then. So for both functional specifications, then technical specification, but when we actually move from functional to technical, that's where we actually try to reconciliate with existing technical specifications. And you talked about the W33C, which actually had some SSI definitions at some point, but was not precise enough to move from functional to technical specification and then to implementation. And that's usually when you actually want to move to implementation, that you discover all the missing parts of the definition that you actually require. So that's where the Gaia X working groups actually patched. So we didn't contribute directly to the W3C, to be honest. We kind of forked part of what was interesting for our use cases, and then we enriched it so we can move to implementation. And all of the process from functional specification, technical specification, and then implementation everything is being done collaboratively into a kind of single repo, public repo that you can find out. And everything is like, and as Christina said, everything is the Gaia X GitLab, which is open. Yeah, so we are not directly contributing to external organizations. I mean, what I said is we actually picked and choose which in existing external documents what was interesting for us to avoid trying to reinvent something that was already existing, that was to be the part of the open source, but we didn't feel that it was our mission to kind of whether patch RFCs or W3C specifications. So for implementation, so it's actually still in the works. But what we've been saying is we are trying. Usually, the way we've been working in the Gaia X community is evaluative, technical, open source solution were existing, and it was a sensible starting point. If there is something that exists and it makes sense to start from there and trying to bring around it, depending on the core structure. So I'm going to take an example which is not the one that I believe is being taken, so I'm trying to be safe there. You go by Keycloak, for example, which is an identity component. There is two approaches, whether you can contribute from a purely upstream to the core components, or you can develop kind of plugins or additions that can be installed or added after being deployed. So depending on the way the product is being built or the open source project exists, you try to adapt to the best way to make the best use of it. I believe that for now, Gaia X is a step ahead of what the market is actually doing. So I feel that we're gonna have a hard time trying to put everything that's been doing in Gaia X into the upstream. The objective for us is to have a valid open source implementation that can be used and tested for everyone. But what we believe that's going to happen on the longer terms is every company is going to start doing their own implementation of the specifications for them, which actually makes sense. You can't have a one size fits all for all of the company, all of the technology out there that are going to need to implement this software. They don't know how to work with it. They don't know how to use it. Maybe it's a technology or a language they are not used to maintain. So the objective of Gaia X and the open source community of Gaia X is not only for the technical, the functional and technical specifications. The implementation is just there to be sure that we're going to help things kickstart. It's not the final form of what should be done. It's just one way of doing things so people can test it out and make it real. But at the end, I'm pretty sure that in 2 to 3 years, every major company that wants to expose or being compliant with Gaia X will develop their own compliance of Gaia X. It's going to expose the same. I'm going to introduce some same interfaces with the same grammar and the same ontology, but it will be done differently in the back ends, which doesn't really matter. The only thing that matters is the result. I'm going to separate the concept of APIs and implementation of the process. I can simplify it by saying yes, it might be some set of APIs and some set of grammar of payloads and specifications of how we're going to exchange data, which basically I think is going to be done in the data space working groups. So it's a way of saying yes, we're going to define an API, but defining an API without having an implementation doesn't make it real. We need to go one step further, even if the steps is just a temporary demonstration, and then everyone's going to put it on the side and make their own version of it. I don't think that the implementation is the value there. The value is the technical specification, and the implementation is just a proof of concept of these specifications. But it needs to exist if you want people to understand that it's real and they can use it. I'm going to let you ask the other question.
Non, c'est une autre question.
Ouais, en fait, si je comprends bien la logique de data space, on a un certain nombre de fournisseurs de données qui injectent leurs données dans la plateforme avec une série de données pivots qui permettent l'intégration de ces données. Et donc, ma question, c'était comment est-ce que vous verriez, notamment sur des données de l'éducation, la question de la lisibilité des données. C'est-à-dire, à quel moment l'utilisateur dont il dit qu'il est d'accord d'alimenter Prométhée.
Oui.
Et la deuxième question, c'est comment est-ce que la contractualisation
Alors, un élément d'architecture, c'est pas un data lake, c'est-à-dire que Prometheus de toute façon n'opère rien. Prometheus fait du Prometheus fait du code que des autres opèrent. Et si je suis fourni, il peut y avoir différentes architectures possibles. Je reprends mon exemple. Sorry. Okay, so I'm going to start again. It's about the kind of data governance in these data exchanges, mostly the question. First, I was specifying that Prometheus builds open source code that others operate. On this sharing, if you say, I want to share my skills data from this skills portfolio to this job board, the data will flow directly from the skills portfolio to the job board, and it's not stored somewhere centrally. Okay, so the organizations plug, as Benjamin was saying, either to yes, it's stream, and it could even be without going through anything. It goes through something if you need the interoperability to translate from one model to the other. So, but you could also have some organizations that say, okay, we want to pull data together and make some kind of aggregated anonymized data set to train AIs, and then they would use the same protocol to put it in a data lake or something else. They can be distributed as well. So that's one thing, and so Prometheus and the data space, it's about kind of the streams and the rules of the stream on a technical and on a legal level. On the legal level, how we do it today, it's two layers. First, it's contracts between data source and data users. At singular or plural, you could have a contract having many data sources and many data users, or just bilateral. And in a sense, the data source specifies its terms and conditions on the data. I only authorize that kind of organization or that kind of usage on my data, and the data user requests the access to the data, and in a sense signs the contract that incorporates what data is going to flow for what purpose and the terms and conditions on the usage, and then you have an authorization between those two organizations. That's the first layer. And then on top of that, there is a consent that is generated to the person that takes the information of the contract. This data is going to flow from here to there for that purpose. Do you authorize it or not? And that's where the, in a sense, person says, okay. It's so the contract, the first contract is between the organizations that actually share the data, and then the person gives a consent through what is called their data intermediary, which has a specific legal role, but it's kind of their technical representative, and they give their consent for the data user to be allowed to use the data of the data source for a specific purpose. So it's a consent, which is a GDPR legal basis, and it's between the person, the data source, and the data user, and specifies which data for what usage and what period of time and so on.
Yes, and we can say that it is true also for industrial data. This is also for personal data, but you can imagine that for a company, they want to control the usage and the access to the data. And they want to express it once, and not each time they have a request on their own data. And this is why we need standards or way of expressing the use. I think we have a last question, very quick question. Yeah.
When do we leave? When do we leave? Est-ce que Gaia X va fournir des mécanismes pour vérifier que les implémentations sont conformes aux spécifications techniques et fonctionnelles?
Yeah, so this is about the test beds. You understood the question? Do you want me to answer it, or do you want to answer it? You want?
Okay. So the short answer to that is yes, if I understood you right. Yes. So we have now the compliance service, which can verify any service, so a generic service that is compliant with the minimum requirements of Gaia X trust framework. That is the short answer, and it's something that you can do today. And I don't know how to simplify it even more, given the time constrictions.
But yes, the answer is yes.
Yes, the answer is yes. Okay.
Thank you all. I think I hope it's clear now for everyone, and we had an interesting discussion. So maybe we could jump to the next one. So thank you for being here. Merci.